Okay, so you want to raise some money. But before you do, let's talk about what investors want. We covered this a little bit yesterday, so we'll go through this part quickly, but I do want to cover SEIS since that's something we didn't touch on too much and it's really important. But yeah, what do investors want? Hint, it rhymes with tunny. Can you guess? It's money. But before you think they're all money crazed monsters, let's look at who they are and what they do. So investors tend to fall into two categories. One, angel investors or VCs. As Engin said yesterday, it's whether you're investing your own money or whether you're investing other people's money. But for the sake of this presentation, I want to mainly focus on SEIS, angel investors. So I believe the majority of this cohort is based in the UK. For those of you who aren't, if you ever plan to raise some UK angel investors, this will still be relevant. So how many of you have gone through the SEIS approval process? Can you raise your hand? And can you do the Zoom raise your hand thing? Because I get a notification for those emojis and I can't see it if you do it without that. Okay, a few of you. Fantastic. About 5 or so. So for those of you who haven't or aren't quite familiar with SEIS yet, so it's essentially a scheme that the government has introduced to incentivize individuals to invest. And so startups can raise up to 250K under this scheme. There's also EIS, which is for slightly larger rounds, but you'll focus on SEIS first. And so SEIS allows individuals to angel invest in the company. And for the amount of money that they put into your company, they can write off 50% of that in their taxes. So let's say, this would be a large angel investment check, but it's a good example. Let's say they put 100K into your company, they can essentially take 50K off the tax bill. For the remaining 50%, if your company goes under or fails to produce any ROI, they can write off an additional 50% off their taxes. So that means their total capital at risk is essentially 25% of the check size. So above the 100K, essentially 25K would be a capital that's like actually at risk on the long term. On top of that, there's advantageous capital gains tax. I believe they don't have to pay any capital gains tax on anything that they produce. I don't want to say that, verify that. But it's a way to incentivize angels. So it's an amazing scheme, but in order to get approved for that, you do need to go through the accreditation process. You can check out Seed Legals. They have a way to like fast track it, or they make it really quick and easy to apply. Before you go out and raise, you're going to want to make sure you have that stamp of approval from the government saying, hey, we've looked over your business plan and we're essentially handing you a letter that you can show to investors that says, we believe that the startup will qualify for SEIS. So it's not a 100% guarantee that you will, but it's essentially the government saying it's very likely this startup does fall under this scheme. So, you can take that into consideration when you are making your investment. So you want to go ahead and do that before. And it's important to remember that angel investors who are primarily investing for SEIS reasons, they might be writing a check size of 1 to 2K on a platform like Seedrs or Crowdcube. They might be writing larger checks, but they might be slightly more incentivized to invest based off of mission or a personal reason where the startup really resonates with them, because they have essentially less money at risk in the longer term. But it also means that you might be speaking with investors who are not would not necessarily fall into like the sophisticated investor category where they've been doing a lot of angel investments. They might be new to angel investing, and so your pitch and your conversation with them might be slightly different. Okay. So angel investors, we covered this mainly. I'll just gloss through this. They're mainly investing because of mission, team, money, SEIS. With team, these also might be individuals who who come from your network who would fall into the like friends and family that we were discussing yesterday with Engin. Okay, so now let's talk about venture capitalists. Venture capitalists really do just want the money, but don't blame them because it is literally their one job. So VC jobs, I think it's helpful to just quickly talk about how VC funds work, because once you understand their mentality, it's going to help you in these conversations with them. So VC's job is to make money for their investors. Their investors are called LPs, limited partners, and these LPs are typically pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, charities, or money from family offices and wealthy individuals. So it's not necessarily their own money, it's these very large entities. Okay, so quiz, does anyone know some of the largest LPs in venture capital funds? Pop it in the chat if you do. Timo, I saw your question. I'll answer it at the end. Okay, so yes, BlackRock, yes. So the largest LP, through 3 out of the top 10 largest LPs are actually pension funds from Canada, and many of the large LPs are pension funds from teachers either in California or Canada. And I always think that's like good to remind founders, because it can often seem like it's this very sort of like you're just VC funds want to make large checks for either large governments or BlackRock, but a lot of this money actually goes to teachers or nurses pension funds or the firefighter pension fund, and so there are like normal human beings on the other side of the table, and I just like to remind people that, because I don't think it's common knowledge. Okay, so now let's get back to you, the founders. So here's 3 questions I want you to ask yourself before you raise. 1, do you want to make as much money as possible within the confines of the law? 2, what's your ideal life in a few years? And 3, have you done the work? And so these questions, be as honest with yourself as possible, and it's going to resolve a lot of pain. It's going to prevent a lot of pain further down the line if you're not honest with yourself and to your investors about what you want. With the first question, do you want to make as much money as possible? This is particularly going to be important for VCs, because if we put on our VC hat, VC's job is to make as much money as possible. And so there needs to be an alignment there. Jenny, I see you have your hand raised. Do you want to ask a question now? You can take yourself off mute if you do, or you can put it in the chat. Oh no, your hand went down. Okay, cool. 2, and then for question number 2, the work-life balance. We're not here to tell anyone that you need to be like working 24/7, that you need to burn all of your relationships with like your family and friends. You need to drive yourself into like a deep hole of despair. In fact, definitely don't do any of those, but it does mean that your work-life balance is probably not going to be super ideal. It's not going to be typical 9 to 5, because investors, you will have pressure on them to make returns. And then finally, for the have you done the work question, saying that you just need money is not going to cut it. So this goes back to what we talked about yesterday on everything that you can do to verify or to prove to investors that you've answered the 4 questions that we talked about yesterday, which goes back to the questions around like the problem, the solution, whether people will pay for it, and whether or not it's a sizable market. Okay, so this is an astronaut asking you, have you done the work? Okay, and so we covered this a little bit, but I think it's important to talk quickly about the return period for VCs and angels in regards to work-life balance. So VCs are typically, their exit period is usually going to be 7 to 10 years after investment. So but in the meantime, you'll have, if you raise from VCs in a pre-seed round, which usually would probably be closer to your seed round or your Series A, but let's say for the sake of this example, we're talking about your pre-seed round. While their exit period is probably going to be in 7 to 10 years, in the meantime, they will expect you to be raised a seed, a Series A, a Series B, a Series C. And what's important about that is when you progress to the next round, VCs will use that success mark to raise their own next round. So VCs are typically raising funds about like, let's say every like 3, 4, 5 years. And when they go and they're trying to pitch LPs, the part that they're going to be bragging about, similar to how startups are going to be talking about their month-on-month growth, their 20%, revenue increase from the last month. LPs are going to be saying, we have 80% of our founders have progressed to the Series A. That's probably not an accurate statistic, but that gives them their proof point to raise the next round. So that's important to think about. Now for angels, their exit period could be before the 7 to 10 years, especially if they get bought out in the Series B or Series C or Series D. They might choose to exit early if they have an earlier liquidity option. Also for angel investors, we spoke about this yesterday, but oftentimes they're not going to be able to double down in future rounds. Perhaps if they invest in your pre-seed round, they'll also give you some capital for your seed round. But without that, that means without investing in the rounds after, the challenging part is they'll often get very diluted. And so their initial stake in the company might be 3%. And then by Series D or Series E, if they haven't reinvested, they might be down to 0.05%. And so the challenge is making sure that their investment is still worth it. And so even though the total value of the company is increasing, if you have things like a down round, which if you don't know what that is, we have the definition of that in the startup book, things like that further dilute them. That's just something to bear in mind. Okay, other considerations for you. Are you prepared to raise for several months full time? Yes, fundraising is typically a full-time job, which means it's very helpful to have a co-founder there who can be focused on the business. Number 2, are you comfortable hearing a lot of no's? And number 3, which co-founder will raise full-time? So are you comfortable hearing a lot of no's? We know many, many, many founders who have spoken to hundreds of investors. And that means hundreds of investors say no or ghosting you, or saying they want to talk to you in their seed round and come back when you have more traction. And that can be a very challenging period and a challenging experience. I think that's helpful to have that knowledge up front. So hopefully you are less jaded by hearing no's. I would really suggest going back and listening to Farhan's talk. Farhan is a superb founder. He went through one of our programs. We actually invested in him in, I think, his pre-seed or seed stage round. And he talks about his experience on hearing no's from lots of investors. That is on, I think it's on our YouTube channel. Purdy, maybe you can share the YouTube link in the chat. And then number 3, which co-founder will raise full-time? Oh, another good reason to listen to Farhan's chat. He's also a solo founder. So for any solo founders out there, he talks a little bit about that as well. But for which co-founder will raise full-time, if you have co-founders, it's really good to have one co-founder who is focused on fundraising, and then the other one is going to be focused on the commercials. One of the things that's challenging about fundraising being a full-time job is, guess what? During those months that you're dedicated to fundraising, investors are still going to be expecting to see growth in your company. And if you're working full-time speaking to investors, it's obviously enormously challenging to make sure that your business is growing at the same time. Now, fundraising, one of the reasons why it's so time consuming is, 1, you're doing a lot of cold outreach and a lot of research to people who are possibly never even going to respond to you. And 2, you're going to be fielding a lot of questions from investors. Some of the time you're going to be hearing questions that you've already answered, so you can just reuse those. But some of the times people might be asking you to display information in a different way, and then you're going to have to create, I don't know, entirely different financial model using their template. Things get complicated and they're time consuming, and it's really important with investors that you are responding to your emails and your messages pretty quickly. They don't tend to like it if you leave their message hanging for a couple of days. So it's time intensive. Okay. Another thing to bear in mind, and we talked about this yesterday as well, is that there's an opportunity cost when investors invest in your company, not just from a capital perspective, but also from a competitive point of view. So we covered this, but investors often will not hopefully invest in competitors. So when they're making their bet on you, not only are they saying, we're choosing to give you this money instead of giving it to someone else, but they're also saying, this is the only this is the only founder who we can fund in the insurance tech category. So we have to believe that this insurance tech company is more likely to succeed than any other insurance tech company that we've seen before, and also any other insurance tech company that might pitch us in the next 5 years. So it's a really big bet from that perspective. It is worth noting that some angel investors, this isn't common, but we have seen it, do invest in competitors. And that's really difficult to kind of find out because there's not places like Crunchbase where you can easily see who's invested in what. So for some angel investors, this slide might not apply to. But again, obviously choosing to work with an angel investor who does invest in your competitor comes with some risks, which I'm sure you can figure out. Okay, we covered this. So your key takeaways: if you want to raise investment, you need to be focused on making money, be all in, and 3, do the work. Okay, so I will end there. We have about 9 minutes or so before Hannah comes in, so I want to stop for any questions. This can be regarding stuff that we've already covered from yesterday. It can be stuff that we haven't covered yet. Or if anyone is speaking with investors now and has any experiences they want to share, go for it. Samia. Oh, you're on mute.
Oh. I'd love to know earlier the point that you made, whether they have capital gains tax. That's one question. And the other is like whether they can offset the tax relief against their income tax, like on their salaries.
Yeah, so the capital gains, SEIS has recently changed. I believe it is that they do not pay any capital gains tax. I'll verify that and get back to you later today on that. And then regarding the income tax, I believe it is against their income tax. Yes.
Okay. Thank
Lily,
you.
do you have any questions? If that's wrong, Samia, I'll let you know today, but I'm 99% sure that is accurate.
Sure.
And I can confirm that it is against income tax.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. Yeah, I had a quick question about, we are SEIS registered,
Nice.
but of course we've had a lot of conversations, I'm sure many others have as well, with international investors. So I just wondered if are there any schemes we should have on our radar that allow international investors to get any sort of benefits investing into UK companies? Is there anything we should be aware of?
So benefits, not that I'm aware of. I would be more concerned about risks. US investors particularly need to be accredited investors. Their definition of who qualifies as an accredited investor varies. Now, obviously, if they're the ones choosing to make their investment, like they should be doing that themselves. And usually when you are investing internationally, you can't count that against your own taxes. And sorry, that's one of the reasons why I said even if you're based abroad, paying attention to SEIS is still worth noting, because if you are based in the US but you choose to open up a UK entity, you can potentially qualify for SEIS, which means raising from UK investors. You could potentially be in a stronger position there if you choose to do that. But in regards to your specific question, no, I'd be focused more on the risks, because the benefits likely won't apply if it's international investment, unfortunately.
Sure. Just to kind of follow up on that, but if we flip that model of opening an office in the UK around, and if we as UK businesses decide to open an office in the US, for example, would that give us access to any sort of schemes out there? There's
not many investment schemes in the US that I'm aware of, but at the same time that can work in your favor, because I think SEIS focuses so much on downplaying the risk or like de-risking startup investment. So angel investors are more in the how can I de-risk this investment mindset, versus US investors tend to be a bit more focused on the opportunity side. So opening up like a D Corp for your company, for example, can absolutely make angel investors or VCs like more comfortable in investing in you. In fact, like YC, for example, makes everyone who goes through YC like register in the US. I have heard more backlash against Delaware since the whole like Musk thing went down a couple of weeks ago. but yeah, like that's worth exploring. Actually, if you are thinking about the US, there's a company called Doola, Doola, that helps companies open in the US pretty like cheaply and quickly.
Right. Thank you very much.
Megan.
Hi. I wanted to understand your point of view. There's a lot of news going around at the moment, and previously that funding is to female founders is a lot less across the market. So as a female founding team, even reading Harvard Business Review from a couple of weeks ago, it's 3% of VC funded businesses raised to female founders. So I just naturally put me off going along that route just because I know it is harder. What's your kind of point of view on that?
Okay, my point of view, first of all, great question. There's so much research out there that I think all this research is like meant to sound the alarms and say like, hey, we need to pay attention to this problem. But I think inadvertently it has put a lot of female founders off pursuing VC funding. I think firstly, we've had a lot of female founders be funded successfully. And I would say fundraising, irrespective of gender or background, for the most part, is really challenging. And we know female founders who have heard no's from hundreds of VCs, and we know male founders who have heard no's from hundreds of VCs and angels. And the reason I say that is I think like whatever perspective you have going into the process is going to shape how you hear those no's. So if you go into it thinking this is going to be so much harder for me, and then all of a sudden you hear hundreds of investors saying no, it can kind of reaffirm like, oh, I'm at a disadvantage because I'm a female, when also men are often having that experience as well. And like one of the founders that we had go through two cohorts ago, she spoke with 2 investors, and the first 2 investors she spoke to said yes, and she closed the round, and she does a consumer good company, which is typically harder to fundraise for. So there's so many incredible success stories. There's also some great data from Seed Legals as well that shows that men and women on their platform who have started funding rounds typically close funding rounds at the same, like they say they have the same success rate, but women typically raise less. And so the total amount of money that they raise is less, but they're able to close the round at the same percentage, if not slightly higher than men. So with that in mind, I would not let anything intimidate you. And even if the cards are stacked against you, that doesn't mean you're not going to be successful. And finally, the thing that I think it is worth paying a little bit of attention to is the types of questions that that female founders typically get asked versus male founders. In fact, I think in the Harvard business case that you might be referencing, they do a great outline on how females are typically asked about the risks and men are typically asked about the opportunities. And so you can kind of prepare the questions or the potential responses to the questions you might be asked with that in mind, and kind of reframing the risk that they're asking about to the opportunity. But good question. And
Can I say one thing, Em?
Go for it.
The smartest investors are blind to your sex. Just like we're sector, geography, and round agnostic, we're also sex agnostic. Whether you're male, female, don't identify as anything, that doesn't matter to your ability to actually make it happen for the startup that you're starting. So the other thing is, do not pigeonhole yourself, and we've talked quite a bit about this with Em and Purdy, into only trying to raise from female founder VCs or female specific VCs, because then all the men out there who may actually be interested in investing in you are going to feel sidelined. So that this may be an unpopular opinion, but it really matters that you don't do that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really good advice. We probably have time for one more question before Hannah comes. So Lorenzo, let's go to you.
Okay. Regarding founding, by the way, I read your startup book on Notion, which is very useful, and just want to follow up regarding what you said this morning regarding contacting the fund investors. In my case, recently it happened something completely the opposite. So, in investors, the associate of an important VC fund contact me on LinkedIn. By the way, on LinkedIn, it's written that I'm working on a startup, but they did not specify the industry and the business model. The associate, they contact me works in the team that basically focus on investing money exactly in the business model of my startup. For now, I've scheduled just a meeting on Calendly. How should I approach the meeting in the relationship? Because based on what you written on Notion, you said that it's good to cultivate the relationship from the very beginning, from pre-seed and seed, even if the startup is per product and per revenue, like my current startup. So how should I manage the relationship in the long term, in the short term, and in the long terms in this case?
Sorry, you cut out briefly, so I just want to make sure I understand your question
So
properly.
basically,
You're
the
in
question
stealth,
is,
an investor approached you for a meeting?
yeah, yes,
Got it. Are you fundraising right now?
no, actually,
Awesome.
not non-officially. This is the problem.
You're in a strong position. Okay. So typically investors want what they don't have. So if you've been with or what they can't get. So if you're not fundraising right now, I would give investors, Engin might have another perspective on this that he can add perhaps in the chat or be able to share with you. But from my point of view, I would probably give a brief overview of what you're doing. Say you're not fundraising, but say you could add them to your monthly updates. So they can keep up to date on what you're doing and see when you grow. And then by the time you go to fundraise, you add, oh, hey, I'm fundraising to my monthly updates. And then it's a good potential point for that angel investor, or sorry, for that VC to reach out. That's what we've had founders do in the past. But I wouldn't feel like, obviously, like, be nice and stuff, but like, I wouldn't feel like you need to, like sell yourself so much. Well, you do, but maybe not advertently, because you're not going in there to pitch. You're just going in there to talk about what you're doing.
Okay.
Let us know how it goes. And yeah, Engin, if you have anything else to add, Parody, maybe pop it in the chat, because I see that Hannah's here. So we're gonna pause the recording here, and then we'll bring Hannah up on stage. Parody, can you pause it?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how to stop the recording. 1 second.